Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert. This is the place where we break down the news that actually matters to the LGBTQ plus community, the good, the bad, and the fuck is going on kind of stories. There's a lot of those the fuck is going on news headlines happening lately. And today we've got a jam-packed episode covering everything from European Parliament officially backing recognition of trans women to the GLAAD Media Awards celebrating queer representation, California proposing stronger protections for trans healthcare, the Trump administration's infamous removal of the pride flag at Stonewall, and yes, the viral chaos surrounding Jake Lang and those alleged texts with a minor. I'm going to get into all of it today. I was not expecting to do 2 episodes back to back of these news story roundups, but so much has happened in Feb that I'm like, I really need to touch on this stuff because I honestly have I could do 10 more episodes of these news updates and bring things to you that I think you need to know. But the most important thing that I think you all need to know, it's a little bit more personal, and I'm not sure if you are aware, but I love candy, okay? And I've said on a previous episode, or maybe many episodes, that I love Easter jelly beans. And Easter's coming, which means when I walked into the grocery store maybe a week ago, all of the Easter candy was there. And my favorite pastel colored jelly beans that are a little bit speckled. I think they're Brock's or Brax or Bratz or something, whatever that brand is. So yummy, but also very toxic. Not many other people like them, but I will eat bags of them. So I thought I should share that with you. So if you want your Easter jelly beans, you know where to go. The fucking grocery store. Okay, but before we unpack all this stuff, give it some context and the drama behind everything, make sure that you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _HotAirPod, and then swing by hotairwithjoshuarobert.com to shop my merch, submit your listener stories, or send your topic suggestions in for future episodes. So strap in, strap on, put your strap on, strap your strap on, grab your beverage of choice, and let's hit it. Part 1. European Parliament signals support for trans rights. Now, before I get into this first story, I swear that I read something that said the opposite of this yesterday, but I was just reading a headline in passing. So part of me was like, maybe I shouldn't bring this to the forefront. But then I also, once I did some research, I was confused because I thought the opposite was happening. But, perhaps I'll have to fix this in the future. But as far as I read, as far as I researched, and as far as ChatGPT told me, here's what happened. The European Parliament made headlines recently after passing a resolution backing the recognition of trans women as women. And depending on which corner of the internet you wandered into that day, it was either framed as a huge win for human rights or the beginning of the apocalypse. And as usual, the reality is a little less dramatic than the Twitter headlines, but it's still a significant political moment that is worth talking about. The vote happened as part of broader conversations around gender equality and women's rights within the European Union. Lawmakers were preparing for international policy discussions, including meetings connected to the United Nations Commission on the status of women. And the topic of who exactly gets included when government talks about protecting women inevitably came up. And that's where transgender women entered the conversation. Members of the European Parliament introduced a resolution essentially saying if governments are going to build policies that protect women from discrimination, violence, and inequality, those protections should include transgender women too. Now, before anyone imagines some sweeping law instantly rewriting every rule across Europe, let's slow that thought down for a second because this is a non-binding resolution, which is political language for a statement of principle, which also sounds like political language. It doesn't immediately force every country in the union to change its laws, but it does send a strong message about where one of the world's most influential legislative bodies stands on the issue. And symbols matter in politics. The European Parliament represents more than 400 million people across the EU's member states. When that institution publicly states that trans women should be recognized as women within gender equality frameworks, it shapes the conversation happening in courts, parliaments, and policy rooms across the continent. The resolution passed with a comfortable majority, which tells you something about the current political climate in Europe. While the topic of transgender rights has become a lightning rod in many countries, including our own, if you're listening from the United States, there's still significant support among lawmakers for expanding protections rather than restricting them. Supporters of the resolution argued that excluding transgender women from women's rights protections does not make sense when you look at the data around discrimination and violence. Transgender women, particularly trans women of color and migrants, face disproportionately high rates of harassment and assault across many parts of the world. Several lawmakers pointed out that policies meant to protect women from gender-based violence would be incomplete if they ignored the experiences of transgender women. One member of parliament summed it up pretty directly during the debate, saying that gender equality must include all women and that human rights protections cannot be selective depending on someone's identity. And when you put it that way, it's pretty straightforward. We're all human beings, whether you agree if somebody can be trans or not, and do we not think they deserve to be treated with the same dignity? That might sound like a fairly straightforward argument, but as we've seen over the last several years, the politics around gender identity are anything but simple. Across Europe, there's been a growing divide between countries expanding LGBTQ protections and those moving in the opposite direction. Nations like Spain, Germany, and Malta have introduced progressive policies on gender recognition and healthcare access. Meanwhile, other governments have embraced more restrictive approaches. And I'm pretty sure that I read that Malta is the safest place in the world for the queer community. Question mark here. I'm pretty sure, or one of the most. Hungary, for example, passed laws preventing people from changing the gender marker on their official documents. In parts of Eastern Europe, political leaders have increasingly framed LGBTQ rights as something imposed by Western liberal elites, which I had mentioned in the previous episode regarding Russia. Russia. Doesn't that sound familiar? If you're sitting in the United States thinking this feels very similar to debates happening here, you are not wrong. The same culture war language around gender identity has been spreading globally, often fueled by the same political playbooks and messaging strategies that are a tale as old as fucking time. It's just a different group of people that they are trying to segregate. So when the European Parliament adopted this resolution, it wasn't just about policy. It was also about pushing back against that narrative. The message was essentially that if Europe is going to claim leadership on human rights and gender equality, it can't conveniently forget that transgender people exist. Of course, critics of the resolution had their own arguments. Some conservative lawmakers claimed that recognizing trans women within women's rights frameworks could undermine protections for cisgender women or create legal complications around spaces like shelters, sports, and prisons. Those arguments have become the centerpiece of opposition to trans inclusion in many countries. Supporters of the resolution pushed back, saying those concerns are often exaggerated and that inclusive policies can be implemented without erasing protections for anyone else. And historically, that tends to be how social progress works. Expanding rights to one group rarely requires taking rights away from another. But in political debates, those two things often get framed as if they're in direct competition. It's also worth remembering that the European Union has long positioned itself as a global leader on LGBTQ+ rights. Over the last few decades, EU institutions have pushed member states to adopt anti-discrimination laws, recognize same-sex relationships, and improve protections for LGBTQ+ citizens. Same-sex marriage is now legal in many European countries, though not all of them. Anti-discrimination protections are written into EU law, and the European Court of Human Rights has issued rulings affirming various LGBTQ+ rights over the years. But transgender rights have been the next frontier in that broader movement. Legal recognition of gender identity varies widely across Europe. Some countries allow people to change their legal gender through a relatively straightforward administrative process. Others require medical procedures, psychological evaluations, or lengthy court battles. So while the European Parliament's resolution doesn't instantly harmonize all those policies, it does push the conversation toward greater inclusion. And for transgender Europeans watching from home, the vote carries symbolic weight. Representation and recognition from the government institutions can influence everything from public attitudes to funding priorities. When lawmakers publicly affirm that trans women are women, it sends a message not only to policymakers, but to society at large. Imagine if Trump turned around tomorrow and was like, trans people are people too. Like, God forbid he ever said anything like that. All of MAGA would, first, they'd lose their shit, but I feel like I can guarantee they would be like, yep, he's right. And they would change their tune. But of course, symbolism alone doesn't solve the everyday challenges that transgender people face. Access to healthcare, employment discrimination, housing insecurity, and violence remain serious issues across many parts of the world. But political signals still matter. They shape the environment in which those larger battles are fought. The reaction to the vote also showed just how polarized the conversation around gender identity has become. LGBTQ plus advocacy organizations celebrated the resolution as an important step towards inclusion and equality. Many activists said it was encouraging to see lawmakers taking a firm stance in support of trans rights during a time when those rights are increasingly under attack. On the other side, critics accuse the European Parliament of promoting ideology or ignoring what they describe as biological realities. Whose reality? Their reality. Those talking points have become standard fare in debates over transgender rights, whether the conversation is happening in Washington, London, or Brussels. Brussels sprouts. I could go for like a barbecue glazed roasted Brussels sprout. And if there's one thing we've learned about culture wars, it's that they rarely stay confined to one country. Political movements borrow strategies from one another all the time. Messaging spreads right across those borders. That's part of why movements like this resonate beyond Europe. So for transgender people, this conversation isn't abstract political theory. It's about being able to live their lives with dignity, safety, and legal recognition. And as I said, the European Parliament's resolution doesn't instantly fix every single challenge. And it doesn't make it law across the land. But I hope that it starts to lead the way. And in political climates where that basic recognition is still contested, that statement from the EU carries a lot of weight. Part 2, GLAAD Media Awards celebrating LGBTQ plus representation. If you haven't noticed, we're starting with a little bit more positive news today because I was a negative Nancy on the last episode. But don't worry, we're going to get to the bullshit stories at the end. I'm actually going to take a break to eat one of these jelly beans. All right, back to it. If you needed a reminder that progress doesn't always happen in courts or parliaments, the GLAAD Media Awards came through this year to give queer representation the celebration it deserves. Now, if you're not familiar, GLAAD is basically the watchdog and cheerleader rolled into one for LGBTQ plus visibility in media. Their awards highlight films, TV shows, music, and journalism that portray LGBTQ plus people in ways that aren't just stereotypes or tragic backstory fodder or the obligatory token gay friend. And yes, they still catch flack from people who complain that queer representation is too political, which is always funny coming from people who somehow never think the latest superhero movie is political. Like, there was a lot of political commentary in the most recent Superman movie. Like, watch it again and pay attention. This year's ceremony was packed with winners across categories, showcasing that queer stories aren't just confined to independent films or niche TV shows anymore. You had everything from blockbuster movies featuring queer leads to streaming series exploring nuanced stories about identity, love, and community. One of the big winners was a show that honestly deserves applause for balancing humor, drama, and genuine queer representation without feeling like it was checking off a list of things we should include to be woke. GLAAD highlighted the importance of authentic storytelling, which is something the industry has struggled with for decades. And for years, LGBTQ plus characters either didn't exist on screen or were portrayed as villains, punchlines, or tragic figures whose entire purpose was to teach the straight audience a lesson. The awards also underscore the ripple effect representation has in real life. Studies have repeatedly shown that when queer people see themselves reflected in media, it boosts self-esteem, reduces internalized stigma, and even helps with mental health outcomes. Conversely, the absence of representation can reinforce feelings of isolation or make societal prejudice feel normal. And that's why GLAAD doesn't just hand out trophies for fun. There's a serious social mission behind it. During the ceremony, several winners gave speeches acknowledging the real-life struggles behind their fictional worlds. One actor speaking after winning for a role as a trans teen in a streaming drama said, "I get messages every day from young people who finally feel seen, and that's bigger than any award I could hold." And that quote really nails it. Representation isn't just about recognition in Hollywood. It's about validation in a world that often tries to erase or invalidate queer identities. It's also worth noting the context. These awards happen in a moment when trans rights and queer protections are under attack globally, which makes them feel both celebratory and slightly defiant. You have countries rolling back rights, legislatures passing restrictive laws, and media outlets debating whether queer stories are appropriate. Meanwhile, GLAAD and these creators are saying, no, our stories matter, our existence matters, and we're going to put it on screen whether you like it or not. And if that isn't protest, I don't know what is. And speaking of pushing back against the haters, GLAAD this year made a point to recognize intersectional representation. That means characters aren't just gay or trans in isolation. They also reflect race, disability, class, and culture differences. This is important because historically, queer media has often focused on a very narrow slice of the community, usually white, cisgender, and affluent. Expanding visibility to include a broader spectrum of queer lives acknowledges that LGBTQ experiences are far from monolithic. There were also some fun pop culture moments that reminded everyone that visibility can be joyful, not just heavy or political. Music performances by queer artists brought energy to the stage, reminding the audience that culture can be a form of protest in itself. One performer even joked mid-set about how their Spotify algorithm probably doesn't get that LGBTQ plus artists should be treated like any other artist, which got a big laugh. And that humor is crucial because, let's be real, sometimes it feels like fighting for visibility requires an endless emotional labor of seriousness, trauma recounting, and moral arguments, which honestly, maybe that's my problem. Maybe that's why I haven't made it to the big leagues yet, because this whole podcast is relatively serious trauma recounting and just bitching about shit most of the time. But celebrations like GLAAD let the community just enjoy being seen and celebrate what they create. So let's go through a quick little list here of some of the awards. So Outstanding Film was Kiss of the Spider Woman. Outstanding Film with a limited theatrical release, A Nice Indian Boy. Outstanding New TV Series. I mean, we all know, Heated Rivalry, except I haven't watched it yet, and I'm like really bad. Outstanding Drama Series, Stranger Things. Outstanding Comedy Series, Palm Royale. Outstanding Reality Program, Southern Hospitality. Outstanding Reality Competition, The Traders. Outstanding Music Artist. I'm old. I can't even say that. Young Miko. It's got to be Miko. Outstanding Breakthrough Artist, Cat's Eye. Outstanding Podcast, Hot Air, just kidding. Outstanding Podcast, Handsome. Outstanding Broadway Production, Liberation. Vanguard Award, Quinta Brunson. If you do not know Quinta Brunson, you're living under a rock. She is the funniest friggin' writer alive. And if you haven't seen Abbott Elementary, you must watch. And Bowen Yang and Matt Rogers won a Stephen F. Kolzak Award. Now, while the awards are fun, they're not flawless. There is always debate about whether mainstream Hollywood can truly capture authentic queer experiences, or if some of this recognition is just performative PR. Some critics argue that studios often include queer characters to appeal to progressive audiences without changing the structures behind the scenes, like hiring and production and storytelling priorities. And that criticism isn't baseless. Hollywood still has a long way to go when it comes to leadership diversity and behind-the-camera representation. But awards like GLAAD keep the pressure on, and they reward the wins while shining a light on areas that still need work, and otherwise shining a light on areas that would get no light on it. An interesting takeaway from this year's ceremony is how international the recognition has become. While GLAAD is an American organization, streaming services and global media mean that these stories reach audiences worldwide. Queer viewers from countries with restrictive laws can see themselves represented in ways that may be impossible locally. One winner noted during their speech that fans had reached out from places where being queer was criminalized. sharing how watching the show gave them hope, and that is where representation becomes resistance. Another historical note, the awards have evolved massively since their inception. GLAAD started in the late 1980s, primarily as a media watchdog. Actually, it was their 37th year, so it had to be like 88 then, because your boy's about to be, I'm not even going to say how old I'm about to be, but anyway. GLAAD started in the late 1980s primarily as a media watchdog, holding news organizations accountable for anti-queer coverage. Back then, the media celebrating representation through awards seemed almost radical. And today, it's relatively normalized, which is both a sign of progress, a reminder that advocacy often has to fight uphill for decades before wins like these feel standard. And while we're being honest, one of the funniest parts of these ceremonies is watching certain industry folks awkwardly read off nominations like it's a math test. You have executives that are nervously congratulating actors, then actors awkwardly trying to convey emotion while holding a heavy glass trophy, and people that might not all be all that comfy being there, perhaps. It's all very performative, which I guess is exactly the point. Media is performative, culture is performative, but authenticity is still going to shine through. What makes the awards particularly interesting in 2026 is the timing relative to all of these broader political movements. While European lawmakers are passing resolutions recognizing trans women and California is proposing new trans healthcare protections, the media landscape is also under scrutiny for how it portrays queer people. GLAAD's celebration of media wins sits at the intersection of these trends, showing that culture and politics often advance in parallel. Representation on screen can make legal protections easier to pass because society sees the people that these laws affect as human beings that have stories and are not just an abstract, made-up being. Overall, these awards remind us that visibility matters, that representation has a hell of a lot of power, and that storytelling can be as revolutionary as legislation. Yes, politicians and activists do the heavy lifting on rights and laws, but culture sets the tone for public perception. Without stories that normalize queer lives, policy progress can feel very abstract or disconnected from the real experiences of the people that it impacts. So whether it's a small indie film showing up at a festival or a Netflix series with millions of watches or streams or whatever, the wins celebrated at GLAAD this year aren't just trophies. They are cultural validation. They're proof that even in the midst of political battles, queer people are seen, celebrated, and influencing the way that the world talks about identity. And it's nice to have reminders that queer people exist, that they thrive and tell their own stories, whether the government likes it or not. Part 3. California proposing stronger protections for trans healthcare. Not me having another jelly bean break. California is at it again, proving that when it comes to progressive legislation, the state likes to go big or go home. And the latest move, proposing stronger protections for trans healthcare. Basically, lawmakers are saying if you are trans, you should be able to access the care that you need without being blocked by politics, bureaucracy, or insurance nonsense. And honestly, that sounds like a pretty reasonable baseline for 2026. And seriously, for fucking all of us. Give us some damn healthcare. The proposed protections aim to prevent insurance companies from denying coverage for gender-affirming care. That includes hormone therapy, surgeries, mental health support, and other medically necessary services. Lawmakers are also trying to make it clear that trans people cannot be discriminated against in medical settings, a problem that unfortunately still exists even in supposedly friendly states. Just because you're a doctor doesn't mean that you are all about the queer rights or the trans rights. Across the country, trans healthcare has become a political battleground. Some states are actively banning certain procedures for minors, while others are trying to criminalize doctors for providing gender-affirming care. California, by contrast, is trying to write legislation that essentially says, no, we are not going to let the politics dictate your access to healthcare. Supporters argue that gender-affirming care is life-saving care, and it's not elective. Studies consistently show that access to gender-affirming treatment dramatically reduces rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation among trans people. When care is blocked or delayed, the consequences can be deadly. That's why supporters are framing this legislation as a public health issue as much as a civil rights issue. Imagine how good you feel When you, I don't know, if you're a female and you go get your hair highlighted, your fucking blonde bleach, and you leave the salon and you're like, oh my God, I feel so good. Like you instantly feel like a hotter, better, newer person. When I go get my hair cut, I leave the barber and I'm like, you are looking fly. You're feeling yourself. That's gender affirming care, you know? And imagine that on such a larger scale. Now, people that oppose these laws, predictably, are calling it controversial. Some conservative groups have claimed that minors are being pushed into irreversible medical procedures. Others argue that taxpayer money shouldn't go towards trans-specific healthcare. The talking points are familiar if you followed national debates over trans rights. They tend to boil down to fear, misinformation, and/or both. Lawmakers in California are pushing back hard. One sponsor of the bill explained that we are not creating anything new. We are simply codifying that discrimination against transgender people in healthcare is unacceptable. Everyone deserves access to the care that aligns with their identity. Historically, California has been a leader in queer protections. From marriage equality battles to anti-discrimination policies, the state has often set the tone for the rest of the country. This proposed legislation fits neatly into that legacy, signaling that California intends to protect trans people even as other states roll back rights. And healthcare discrimination against trans people is not just hypothetical. Reports show that trans patients are often misgendered, denied coverage, or refused care outright. Sometimes it's a subtle refusal, like endless paperwork or red tape, and sometimes it's overt. Either way, it creates barriers that can literally impact survival. The proposed protections would also apply to minors, which is the area that sparks the most debate. And I've said before, I don't even know if I have an opinion on this because I am not the parent of a trans child. So access to care for trans youth is highly politicized, but medical consensus backed by organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics says that gender affirming care can be critical for the mental health of trans adolescents. This legislation is trying to codify that standard into law, ensuring that doctors can provide appropriate care without fear of legal retaliation. California's approach also sends a message beyond its borders. When a major state with millions of residents formally protects trans healthcare, it pressures insurers, hospitals, and even other states to consider what standard of care should look like nationwide. It's one of those situations where law isn't just about enforcement, it's about setting a cultural and professional standard. Of course, the bill is not guaranteed to pass, and even if it does, there will always be pushback. Anti-trans organizations have already pledged to fight the legislation, promising lawsuits and public campaigns. It's a reminder that even in a state like California, the fight for trans rights is ongoing and requires constant vigilance. But for now, the proposal feels like a win. A reminder that legislation can be used to protect people, not just restrict them. In a political climate where trans rights are under siege in many parts of the country and the world, California is drawing a line in the sand and saying, we will defend our trans residents. And honestly, that kind of clarity is quite refreshing because too often protections are murky, they are inconsistent or conditional, and Gavin Newsom has said some questionable things lately. I mean, not just lately, but often. I'm not really a fan of his either. This proposal doesn't just codify care, it codifies respect and recognition of trans identities in the medical system. Part 4. Trump administration removing the pride flag from the Stonewall landmark. And this one is personal because I was just at Stonewall and I was just like so excited to be there, which I'm actually surprised I didn't post it on the Hot Air socials. I'm actually, well, by the time this comes out, I will have also just been in San Fran and did some Harvey Milk sightseeing. So it's been a really cool 2026 where I've got to see these landmarks, some of them for the second time, but really appreciate the importance of them after I started this podcast and actually started educating myself about queer history. So I will share some of that shortly. But anyway, now, if you're not familiar with Stonewall and the history of Stonewall, it is where Pride motherfucking began, okay? And I did a whole episode about it, so you can go listen to that, and then this will make a lot more sense. But essentially, the Trump administration decided it was a good idea to remove the Pride flag from the Stonewall Inn National Monument, the iconic queer landmark where the modern gay rights movement basically ignited, not basically ignited, it did ignite in 1969, suddenly had less rainbows than your average cubicle. The flag had been flown as a symbol of visibility and respect for the queer community, and the administration quietly pulled it down, saying it was part of routine flag rotations. Cue the collective eye roll, like, petty much? Like, the fuck? Here's the thing. This wasn't just a flag. We know that. Stonewall is sacred ground for queer history. The Stonewall riots were not a polite debate. They were a riot against police harassment and systemic oppression. They marked the very beginning of the modern queer activism. The monument itself was designed in 2016 by President Obama, and part of that designation included a sense of honoring queer history. So, when the pride flag came down, it wasn't a neutral, bureaucratic move. It felt like erasing visibility at a time when queer communities are already under attack politically and socially. It's like a little signal, a little wink, if you will. Like, not a cute wink, like a wink like, bitch, we're removing you from existence. And the backlash, not surprisingly, was immediate. Activists, politicians, and everyday New Yorkers were like, seriously? A pride flag? Keep that shit in Texas, okay? Social media erupted with pictures of empty flagpoles and memes lamenting the lack of rainbows. One local activist said, it's a small thing, but symbols matter. Pride isn't just about parties, it's about recognition, respect, and remembering our history. And she wasn't wrong. Symbols like flags, murals, and monuments aren't just decorative. They communicate who is valued and who is visible in society. Which is why Trump has been removing a lot of these flags and monuments from various minority groups around the country. Critics argued that this was part of a broader pattern of the Trump administration, minimizing or ignoring queer recognition. From rolling back anti-discrimination guidance in schools to banning trans people from the military service, the removal of the flag fit into a larger narrative. Supporters of the administration tried to frame it as a procedural move. Flags get taken down and replaced all the time. But for the queer community, context matters. Context is literally everything when it comes to symbols of visibility and inclusion. Taking down the pride flag at Stonewall felt like rubbing salt in a wound that's been decades in the making. And I feel like a real president would say, I know what's going on in the country. I know there is so much division. There are Republicans, there are Democrats, there are people that don't assign themselves any label to any party. Wherever you stand, whether you like queer people or not, whether you are gay yourself, whether you are trans, wherever you belong in the rainbow alphabet, we are going to rotate the flags, okay? We're going to take it down. We're going to put a fresh one up. I'm not taking it down to signal I understand how it might feel and that it might feel like a direct attack and that it might be, I don't know, like a symbol or a dog whistle or all of those terms. Like, if it is the case that they're just cycling through a flag, to be aware of sensitive topics like this, you know, I mean, the president does have a lot to think about, even though I dislike him. I can't imagine him making a statement like that, being like, I don't want your feelings to be hurt, gays. I'm just going to put up a new, fresh rainbow flag. But you know what I'm saying here? Like, you can have a little bit of sensitivity, and you should, because you're supposed to be the president for all. And it's worth noting that the pride itself has a rich history. Designed by Gilbert Baker in 1978, the rainbow flag was a deliberate choice of colors meant to symbolize diversity, unity, and hope. Flying it over Stonewall wasn't just decoration, it was a reminder of the community's resilience and the struggles that people have fought through to achieve visibility and rights. The removal, intentional or not, sent a subtle message that visibility could be, and can be, and will be conditional. Something that you earn, not something you inherently deserve. Unsurprisingly, the media pounced. Outlets like the New York Times and NBC covered it, some editorializing that the administration had erased a symbolic acknowledgement of the queer history. Social media influencers used it as a teachable moment, reminding younger audiences that pride isn't just parades and glitter, it's about activism, legal battles, and being seen in a society that has historically tried to erase queer lives. Now, a flag is just fabric, but where it is placed, where, when, and by who it is displayed, it carries a lot of meaning. Take it down at a national monument that commemorates queer resistance, and suddenly you've made a statement without saying anything. And that really sums up what I was trying to say before. taking it down is a statement in itself, why not make a statement prior to acknowledging that this might appear as a statement and it's not? I'm just going to wash the flag. I'm going to throw it in the washing machine with my, well, not with your white clothes because then it'll make it all kinds of colors. I'm going to throw it in my washing machine with the darks, with some fucking Tide Pods, and then I'm going to put it back up. Like, easy peasy. Now, there's also historical parallel here. Remember when governments and institutions tried to remove or silence queer symbols during the AIDS crisis, or when rainbow flags were banned in schools or public buildings? And by when, I mean now, because that's happening. The Stonewall flag removal might not be on the same scale, but it taps into a long history of authorities controlling visibility. Now, I will say, which is kind of cool, interestingly, the removal, it sparked unintentional educational moments. So maybe for the young queer people today that don't know or have never visited Stonewall, they learned about its history. They maybe learned about why pride flags are flown and why visibility matters. Online threads explaining the significance of Stonewall and the pride flag went viral, turning a negative act into a teaching moment, I suppose, like we're trying to do here. And if nothing else, the administration's move inadvertently amplified awareness of queer history. So, although I think Trump's a little pussy-ass bitch, thanks, because everyone was talking about the gays yet again. I'm not going to get heated today. I'm not trying to get deported, okay? Breathe. The controversy also led to discussions about the limits of neutrality in government symbolism. Can a government just follow procedure when it comes to symbols of marginalized communities? Or does the act of removing or ignoring those symbols inherently communicate a political stance? For queer advocates, the answer was obvious, that action matters, and so do symbols. We also know that across the country, similar debates were happening. Should pride flags be flown at federal buildings? Should trans-inclusive signage be allowed in schools? Each small decision about visibility became a flashpoint because in a country where queer rights are still being contested, symbols are one of the few public ways that the community can assert presence and legitimacy. The takeaway is clear. Flags, monuments, and visibility are political, whether people admit it or not. For the Trump administration, the removal may have been framed as routine, and perhaps it was. I'm always here to give benefit of the doubt, okay? But for the queer community, it was a reminder that progress is never guaranteed and that visibility can be fleeting without advocacy. And if you think about it, this incident also ties into this large pattern of how queer history is constantly under negotiation. Every Pride Month, every memorial, every symbolic gesture can be challenged, questioned, or defended. And that's why communities have to fight for these moments, even when they seem very small, because small symbols often become the spark for larger conversations about rights, representation, and respect. Part 5. The Jake Lang online text allegations. Now, before I do this, let's just say these are allegations. Allegedly. What do they always say on The View? Allegedly. Yeah, allegedly. I'm not claiming to have investigated this. I came across this story on Insta, and the only reason I talk about this is because MAGA and the far right like to frame the queer community as predators. And what do we know about the Epstein files? There's not a single gay, trans, queer, whatever person in there. They're all straight, fucking, cisgender men, okay? As far as we know, I haven't read them all, but I'm pretty sure we'd be hearing about it. They like to say that school shooters are trans or part of the queer community, when the facts and the stats say that they are more often than not at a wildly higher percentage straight, white, cisgender men, okay? Those hardcore evangelical priests are the ones that are molesting children and are raping women, and they are coming after us. So that's why I bring this up, okay? So should have said a little trigger here. We are going to be talking about some text allegations that revolve around a minor. So nothing explicit, but just, could be a trigger. So let's get into it. I'm going to get too distracted here. Actually, let me have one more jelly bean because this is the last story. Now, this absolutely exploded on social media, and I don't even know who this guy was, but it's one of those moments where the internet collectively loses its mind before anyone actually knows what is real, what is fact, and what is fiction. Right-wing activist and Florida Republican Senate candidate Jake Lang, once you look into him, you'll be like, okay, wait a second. I know. The far-right influencer who was pardoned by former President Trump after his role in the January 6th Capitol riot suddenly found himself trending for a very different reason. Alleged text messages between him and someone claiming to be a 15-year-old girl started circulating online, and within hours, people were screaming, "Arrest him," across every timeline you can imagine. Now let's unpack this, because on the surface, it looks like one of those classic internet flameouts, but with viral screenshots, anonymous accounts, people piling on with their own theories. But the deeper you dig, the murkier it's going to get. And there's not a lot of facts because this literally just happened. According to the screenshots being shared, the conversation showed Lang chatting with what the poster claimed was a 15-year-old, with some users pointing to language in the messaging that suggested an inappropriate tone, asking whether she would be attending one of his rallies. Some versions of the screenshots even had Lang allegedly discussing ages and future plans once the girl turned 16, which I saw those ones. The post spread like wildfire on every single solitary platform you can imagine, and calls for law enforcement to step in obviously happened immediately. So here's where it stops being straightforward. First, none of the text messages have been independently verified by reputable news organizations or law enforcement at the time of this Hot Air report. All we have are screenshots that are circulated on social media, retweeted by accounts. He also retweeted them and said that they were baseless and bullshit and a hoax and whatever. I mean, he didn't even use the words baseless and bullshit, but I forget what he said, but it was something stupid. In the age of deepfakes and all the AI and political stunts and just screenshots alone are not enough to declare someone guilty. We know that. But it is enough to ruin a reputation and absolutely kill someone's career and then also stir up outrage. And as I said, Jake Lang, he did respond. And his response was as chaotic as you might expect. Rather than flat out apologizing for a mistake or providing evidence to counter the allegations directly, like saying, "Here's my phone, here are my DMs, take a peek," Lang claimed that the whole thing was a phishing setup, orchestrated by followers of far-right activist Nick Fuentes, commonly referred to online as groypers. He shared screenshots of what he said were conversations with Alex Rosen, the founder of Predator Poachers, a group that specializes in online sting operations aimed at luring adults into incriminating chats with people that are posing as minors. It's very confusing, isn't it? Lang's message claimed he wouldn't even allow this person to attend my protests until they were 16, suggesting that nothing untoward ever happened beyond that initial exchange. So the text that I read, that I saw, and clearly he's saying that this conversation happened. He didn't dispute it. He said the conversation about the age happened. He said in the text message something along the lines of, "Will we be meeting one day?" The minor, who could be a minor or could not be a minor, was posing as a minor, said that they might. And then he asked how old they were. They said 15. He asked, when will you be 16? And then they responded with when they would be 16. He said something along the lines of, "You know what? I'm not even trying to make it up. Let me pull it up right now." This is real reporting, real time, while eating jelly beans. Jake said, "Are you coming to my next protest in Texas?" The minor said, "I can if you want me to." Jake said, "Yes, what's your number?" The minor said, "Can we talk on here instead, or you only text?" Jake said, "I have too many DMs, text only, sweetie." Okay, that's just weird in and of itself. There's another screenshot that says, "I'm laying down now. What did your mom say?" The minor said, "How old are you, by the way?" Jake said, "I just turned 30, honey. Why are you up so late, young lady?" Weird verbiage. The minor said, "Nice, and I don't know, I be a night owl. I might be too young for you, LOL. Jake said, "How old are you, baby?" Baby. Unless you are under 18, I don't care." Which, I mean, you should care. Why are you 30 and you're going to date an 18-year-old, you nasty motherfucker? The minor responded and said, "I'm 15, LOL, and sent a picture. Jake then says, "When do you turn 16? The minor responds, in 6 months. I won't get you in trouble if that's what you are worried about. I can keep a secret. And Jake liked that response. Then Jake said, what state do you live in? I can't see you until you're 16. They responded that they live in Arizona and they just moved there. So claiming that any of this, because I glanced over these earlier, but like actually claiming that any of this is a scheme and someone's trying to catch you, why would you be responding like that? Asking when they turn 16, calling them baby, asking what state they live in. Like, bro, you a predator. You a pedo. You nasty ass motherfucker. Let me get back to being professional here and continuing with the story as it is being reported. So Jake said that nothing untoward happened, but we can read for ourselves what the texts say. So you got to pause right there and take a breath because it's a perfect example of how modern scandals unfold. Unverified screenshots, which of course these could be made up, although he has responded and said that they are not, or hasn't said that they are. These are very explosive allegations, and it's a vague denial that blames like a setup without proving clarity. Like it's a perfect storm of confusion. People online are treating this like a smoking gun. Other people are dismissing it as a prank. And somewhere in the middle are reporters and everyday users like me trying to figure out who actually has the receipts and whether they're even real. But here's the part that is worth zooming in on: the reaction. Once the screenshots hit social media, gazillions of people started calling for Lang's arrest. Not like investigate him or law enforcement should comment on this, but straight to like arrest him now. Probably should, but whatever. That kind of rush to judgment is exactly what makes viral allegations very dangerous, and especially when it has to do with a minor. The internet doesn't wait for any type of nuance. It absolutely detonates first and asks questions later. Lang is already a controversial figure with a long public record. He was heavily involved in January 6th events at the Capitol, has staged provocative protests in New York City in the past, and has a reputation as a political agitator. That background means people are predisposed to believe that bad things happen around him and bad things about him. And in the minds of many critics, those predispositions become proof in themselves. And that is how online narrative turns into facts without any due process. Now, there's another twist in the story, though. The twist is the involvement of predator sting groups like predator poachers. These groups are controversial in their own right because they create scenarios where adults are tricked into messaging with people who aren't actually minors. Sometimes the people are adults themselves that are pretending to be children. The goal is basically to catch who could be, would be, might be pedophiles. But the tactics that they use raise some serious questions about entrapment, authenticity, and ethics. And entrapment specifically, I do not know the laws around entrapment, but I'm pretty sure entrapment's illegal or something like that. So when someone accused by social media of inappropriate behavior points to a preemptive sting or phishing setup, you suddenly have like 700 layers to the story. The viral allegation, the possibility of a setup, and the question of how reliable any of it actually is. And I am not defending him. I have said very openly, I think anybody who even thinks about hurting a minor in that way, or anyway, quite frankly, but anyone who's a fucking pedo, I think they should be, this is dark, okay, but I think they should be castrated. I think they should then be thrown on an island by themselves. And then I think they should, starve for a little bit, perhaps receive the same type of torture that they gave to others, and then kill them. Like, I literally think every single solitary pedophile should just be killed. That's my opinion. I feel like crazy even saying that, but I think I've said that before. Like, get the fuck rid of them. We don't need them to be alive. Okay? Bye. So I don't even know why I started down that rabbit hole. Oh, I'm not defending him, right? I'm just saying that things can be like misconstrued or misunderstood. I don't think that these text messages are going to be misunderstood. To me, they're pretty straightforward. But again, I'm covering my ass here. These are all alleged accusations. And because this involves allegations and they're unverified allegations that are about inappropriate contact with a minor, responsible reporting means we have to be really careful not to present rumors as facts. But facts are Jake Lang is a motherfucker and he's useless, and hopefully this will take him down. There's been no official law enforcement confirmation that Jake Lang is under investigation for this specific allegation, nor has there been an arrest connected to those viral screenshots. What has happened is pressure from online communities, commentary from users, and Lang's sort of denial, but not. Like, that is it. Nothing more. And really, the takeaway here isn't like he did it or he didn't do it, because at the moment, neither of those things can be verified. The takeaway is how quickly social media can escalate rumors into nationwide outrage or escalation. It's how partisan identity influences whether people believe or doubt allegations, and how difficult it is to separate emotion from evidence in the age of instant virality. And that goes for everyone. Like, when I say separate emotion, like, there's mega people that love Jake, and they're probably thinking that this is a scam or a lie or AI or all the things. Meanwhile, I'm over here being like, you a pedo, bro. So, well, the Jake Lang alleged text story is still unfolding, and authorities haven't confirmed any criminal charges. I'm sure he will be investigated, and I would not be surprised if they found a shit ton of stuff on his computer. It stands as a stark example of how quickly allegations spread and how little we sometimes pause to question where those allegations actually came from. And that's part of why media literacy matters now more than ever. I also said this in the last episode. Listen, watch, and read from multiple sources, not just to be informed, but to understand how narratives are constructed online, how they mutate, and how easily they can distort someone's public image, whether the story is true or false. And that wraps up today's absolute whirlwind of hot air. Maybe I have a lot of sugar in my system from these jelly beans. Damn, we covered victories like the European Parliament recognizing trans women and GLAAD celebrating queer stories, protections in California, the symbolic and messy removal of the pride flag at Stonewall, and the social media frenzy over Jake Lang being a nasty bitch. What's the takeaway? Progress happens, setbacks happen, and the fight for visibility, rights, and accountability is never over. And the most likely culprits are the ones pointing the finger at who? Us gays. But awareness, conversation, and a little humor goes a long way in making sense of it all. If you like today's episode, make sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at _HotAirPod. Check out hotairwithjoshuarobert.com to shop my merch, submit your listener stories, or pitch your topic suggestions for future episodes. So stay informed, stay curious, stay sassy and cunty as hell while you are at it, and always, I will see you next Tuesday.